but necessary decisions to stabilize the economy is not an option, but an obligation that we owe to the present and future generations. The Budget Committee, Mr. Speaker, sir, met between the 22nd and 23rd of November 2025 to analyze the midterm budget and come up with the report to present to this House, which I must say is ready. Mr. Speaker, sir, our analysis has been thorough and has been thorough, reflecting deeply on both the crisis that we are in and the opportunities that lie ahead. Allow me, therefore, Mr. Speaker, to walk the House through the report, starting with our observations on the general macroeconomic environment. Mr. Speaker, sir, whereas Sub-Saharan Africa continues to show resilience, Malawi's economic environment is assessed as highly fragile, marked by persistent inflation, severe foreign exchange shortages, intermittent fuel supply constraints, and external vulnerabilities that have collectively undermined business activity and industrial output. Malawi's economic growth has faced significant downward revisions, with a 2025 forecast adjusted from an initial 3.2% to 2.7%, reflecting substantial domestic constraints and consistently falling short of the MIP1 target of annual growth of 6%. With real GDP growth projected at only 2.7%, money supply expansion is significantly outpacing real economic activity, thereby exacerbating macro-fiscal imbalances and fueling inflation. This trend, Right Honorable Speaker, contradicts conventional economic wisdom and the IMF guidance, which recommends that money supply growth should not exceed real GDP growth by a wide margin, typically between 5 and 7 percentage points, to avoid inflationary pressures. But in our case, Right Honorable Speaker, money supply growth rose sharply to 41.5% in 2024, from 32.2% in 2023, and has further moved to 52.1% in 2025. Mr. Speaker, at the mid-year, the committee notes that inflationary pressures remain elevated. Despite the Monetary Policy Committee maintaining a tight monetary stance with the policy rate held at 26% for some time now, achieving sustained disinflation will require more than monetary tightening alone. And fiscal consolidation and improvements in the food supply remain critical. The committee recognizes that high inflation continues to erode real incomes, especially for low-income households, due to the dominance of food prices in the inflation basket. On the fiscal sector, Right Honorable Speaker, Malawi's fiscal position remains under severe strain, characterized by unsustainable debt levels and growing expenditure pressures. I cannot emphasize this enough, more than how the minister already did. Our total public debt stands at a staggering 21.6 trillion as reported in the budget, and I'm only hoping the 28 trillion maybe now takes into account what this House did 2-3 days ago. But allow me, Right Honorable Speaker, to stick with what has been presented of 21.6 trillion, with budget deficits being the main contributing factor to this accumulation. The continued fiscal imbalance has been driven by our appetite to spend more than we can collect in revenues as government, and government expenditure continues to grow at a faster pace than revenues. And the debt service burden has become increasingly oppressive, with the current public debt interest charges being projected at 2.271 trillion. Mr. Speaker, of the 8 trillion budget that is on the floor right now, 2.271 trillion will be shared amongst a few in the financial sector, primarily our banks. Right Honorable Speaker, statutory expenditures and other mandatory expenditures comprising wages and salaries, pension and gratuities, debt servicing, and the presidency comprise up to almost 99% of domestic revenue. The budget documents show that the statutory and mandatory expenditure that the minister has no discretion but has to spend by law, is at 4.466 trillion. And yet, all domestic revenue only adds up to 4.478 trillion. Whatever we collect as a nation by way of revenue is only enough for 4 votes. Mr. Speaker, sir, this is how urgent and serious the issue of fiscal space, or lack of it, is, and hence the need for urgent and aggressive fiscal consolidation. Mr. Speaker, Winston Churchill once said, "Taxes are an evil, a necessary evil, but still an evil, and the fewer we have of them, the better." He further said, "For a nation to try to tax itself into prosperity, it is like a man standing on a bucket and trying to lift himself up by the handle of that bucket." These reminders, Mr. Speaker, underscore the need for balance. In addressing our crisis, we must combine prudent revenue mobilization with firm expenditure discipline and growth-enhancing reforms, rather than relying predominantly on higher taxes. It is this balanced approach, protecting the vulnerable, safeguarding fiscal sustainability, and supporting private sector-led growth, that the committee believes should guide our corrective response. Allow me to turn to the performance of the first half of the 2025-2026 financial year. Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee noted that total revenues and grants have underperformed their mid-year targets by 12.1%. At the beginning of the financial year, the Minister of Finance projected that by mid-year, the government would have collected 2.71 trillion in revenue and grants. However, government was only able to collect 2.382 trillion. As a result, revenues only covered 56.1% of total expenditure against the 63.8% target that was planned. A mixed performance was also observed on the domestic revenues, as tax revenue fell short of the targeted by 81.9 billion, while non-tax revenue exceeded their mid-year target by 9.6 billion. Whilst the committee applauds the positive performance on non-tax revenues, it expressed concern on the underperformance on tax revenues, notably, Mr. Speaker, sir, the pay as-you-earn payee aspect. This has underperformed despite the many recruitments and promotions that have occurred in the first half. The committee therefore requests clarification on why payee has underperformed, yet at the same time, recruitment and promotions also led to an overrun on the wages and salaries on the same half. We would expect that the more you recruit, the more you promote, payee should also improve likewise. But we do seem to have a mismatch, and we would expect the Honorable Minister to explain to the House why there's been a mismatch. On the performance of expenditure in the first half of the first year, Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee noted that fiscal pressures have persisted, and the committee observed an overrun of 175.7 billion, with total spending reaching up to 4.42 trillion against 4.24 trillion. Mr. Speaker, sir, what are the implications on the performance of the budget, especially on the budget financing, when we have all these cost overruns and revenue shortfalls? Mr. Speaker, sir, these revenue shortfalls and expenditure overruns have culminated in a budget deficit of 2.04 trillion, significantly above the mid-term target of 1.53 trillion, representing an overrun of 494.308 billion. And what is worrisome, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that the 494 billion of this deficit is financed entirely domestically, accelerating the growth of domestic debt and amplifying fiscal risks. Mr. Speaker, sir, we enter the second half of the financial year with extremely tight fiscal space and an urgent need for decisive action on both revenue mobilization and expenditure control if we are to rescue or to restore the fiscal sustainability. The committee's observations on the 2025-2026 midterm budget. Mr. Speaker, sir, allow me now to move to the committee's analysis of the proposed 2025-2026 budget revisions. And let me begin with changes in revenue projections. Mr. Speaker, sir, based on mid-year performance and prevailing economic conditions, the committee noted that total revenues and grants were revised downwards by 117.6 billion to 5.460 trillion. This is a net effect of the 42.1 billion increase in domestic revenues and a 159.7 billion decline in grants. This upward adjustment in domestic revenue is largely driven by the higher non-tax revenue projections, reflecting the Ministry's efforts to enhance revenue mobilization beyond traditional taxes, which is commendable. On the downward revision on tax revenues, the committee understands that this reflects the underperformance observed in the first half. However, given the proposed tax measures aimed at improving revenues, the committee would like to call on the government to provide details on the expected net impact the measures are going to have on revenue generation. With regards to grants, Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee is aware that the government is in discussion with donors, including the IMF, to restore Malawi's extended credit facility. The committee therefore requests the Honorable Minister to provide an update on these discussions to the House at an appropriate time. While still on revenue, sir, the committee carefully reviewed the revenue measures proposed by the Honorable Minister as follows. On payee, the committee acknowledges the increase in the zero-rated threshold from 150,000 to 170,000. This might shield the low-income earners. It also noted the changes in the rest of the payee structure aimed at improving revenue mobilization. However, the committee noted that the payee target, like other taxes, has been revised downwards. The committee therefore requests an assessment of the net impact of the newly introduced payee bracket on both the employee's take-home pay and overall revenue performance. Because if the payee is projected to come down, then the measure that has been introduced on the payee, the House will need to be furnished as to what end we have this change if it reduces what government is expected to correct on the payee. On the gambling winnings, Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee supports the increase in withholding tax from 10 to 15%, but believes a 20% rate would generate more revenue without distorting the industry, given the rapid growth of the gambling industry. On rental income tax, Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee knows that enforcement remains a challenge, and to strengthen compliance, the committee recommends that government expedite the rollout of a national digital addressing system to easily locate rented properties. It was mentioned in this House that MRIA will now start going around the houses with a hardcover writing down the names of landlords. We believe that if digital addresses or address system was expedited, it would save the hassle and the trouble of going manual in collecting data that would give government who owns what. Furthermore, government should also consider integrating compliance to key public service systems such as the Malawi traffic registration system and land registration system to enhance enforcement and compliance. In this case, payment of withholding tax could be set as a prerequisite for accessing services under the linked public service system being demanded by a citizen. Honorable Minister, it is therefore urgent to speed up the implementation of the whole government-wide network system and enhance linkages of government MDA's systems. On VAT, Mr. Speaker, the committee is of the view that the proposed increase of 16.5 to 17.5% risks worsening the cost of living for Malawians. Instead, the committee is aware that the current VAT framework has become fragmented over time, with multiple exemptions that narrow the tax base, open room for loopholes, and make administration of VAT more difficult. The committee therefore recommends a comprehensive review of the VAT Act to modernize the framework and reduce inefficiencies without burdening consumers. We believe that if this is done, VAT should be coming down rather than going up. Mr. Speaker, sir, besides these tax revenues, the committee considered a non-tax alternative form for revenue generation that pose less burden on average citizens, such as establishing new toll gates while considering revisions of toll gate fees we currently have. Formalizing control of bus stops and taxi ranks is also another area that can be considered. Allow councils to take control of bus stops and taxi ranks. That way, government would net in these resources, which are currently going to private individuals as we speak. Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee is committed to working with the government to find alternative sources of revenue whilst protecting Malawians and without distorting the market, and the committee will be engaging the minister in due course on this matter. I will now move to the committee's analysis of the expenditure revisions. Mr. Speaker, sir, total expenditure in 2024-25 revised budget has increased by 512 billion, rising from 8.077 trillion to now a budget of 8.59 trillion, representing a 6.35% upward revision. This revision highlights continued pressure on the spending side of the budget, with recurrent expenditure driving the overall increase, whilst development expenditure being reduced. Recurrent expenditure, Right Honourable Speaker, now claims 77.6% of the total revised budget, compared to 75% at the beginning of the year. Some of the major contributions to this rise include increased allocations towards Farm Input Subsidy Program, pensions, use of goods and services, increased domestic interest payments, and wages and salaries. And Mr. Speaker, the committee also acknowledges the government's stance to tighten expenditure controls through the announced austerity measures. However, some of the proposed revisions in the budget suggests increased spending on welfare programs, which undermines the spirit of austerity. While the committee understands the significance of these programs, it calls on the government to begin to make bold decisions towards development programs in order to ensure sustainable welfare programs, but later. On the development budget, Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee observed a downward revision of 89.9 billion. This is a net effect of 181.6 billion decline in foreign finance projects and the 91.7 billion increase in domestic projects. The committee would like to re-emphasize the need to deal with challenges in project implementation. Government should outline measures that it will put in place to address these bottlenecks on the capacity of project implementation units and procurement systems in liaison with the donors. There is also a need to short-term and long-term solutions with regard to forex, particularly for projects, and the role that the development spending plays in structural development and economic growth cannot be overemphasized. Right Honourable Speaker, the minister should not just stop at lamenting on the failure by our system to absorb project funds, but must propose drastic measures to deal with this chronic problem. It does not make sense, Mr. Speaker, sir, why we should fail to spend money we already have in the situation which we are in. Right Honourable Speaker, as a result of the subdued revenue projections amidst increasing expenditure needs, the budget deficit has now widened by 630.18 billion. And of this increase, 586.77 billion is domestic debt, which now constitutes 94% of the deficit financing, which is over a third of our budget. Allow me, Right Honorable Speaker, to take this again. As a result of the subdued revenue projections, amidst the increasing expenditure needs, the budget deficit has widened substantially by 630.18 billion. Of this increase, 586.77 billion is domestic debt, but domestic debt is now standing at 94% of the deficit financing, which is over a third of our budget. And we know the evils of domestic financing. These trends highlight the seriousness of Malawi's public debt situation, particularly on domestic borrowings, as observed on the high domestic debt interest charges. Right Honorable Speaker, restructuring domestic debt is one option, but it has two downside risks. Namely, a few of our local banks can pass the stress test if domestic debt is restructured. That will result in such banks collapsing with untold repercussions on the financial sector, including on us depositors. But secondly, if restructuring is the way to go, it will also be very difficult for government to access short-term financing to implement the budget that relies on the very same banks once the restructuring path is formally put to the banks. In view of these difficulties, the committee encourages the government to consider targeted taxation or any other fiscal measures levied specifically on the financing sector or financial sector that can help recover some of the resources in an equitable and market-friendly manner. Right Honorable Speaker, it is painful that this House passes an 8 trillion budget and more than 2 trillion is interest charges to our 7 or 8 banks. Of the 23 million Malawians, the 8 trillion that we are passing here, only 6 trillion will be shared amongst the banks. The 2.2 trillion will be shared amongst a few banks. And I think this is unfair, and if the banks cannot take restructuring of the domestic debt, then they need to arrange a win-win situation with the ministry so that we plow back some of these resources back to government. Right Honorable Speaker, I know I have a few minutes to go, but allow me to go on the recommendations that the committee made. Mr. Speaker, sir, before I conclude, allow me to leave the House with the following key recommendations. On the proposed tax revenues, the committee calls the minister to appraise the House on the net impact that is expected of the proposed tax measures, most especially the payee. The committee also appreciates how challenging enforcement of rental income tax and withholding tax can be due to limited taxpayer identification and weak tracking mechanisms. To strengthen compliance, the committee recommends that the government expedite the rollout of a national digital addressing system and integrate it with the key public services such as the Malawi traffic registration and the land registration system. On VAT, the committee recommends that government prioritizes the VAT Act, and I think if there's a better time to bring an overhaul of a VAT Act, now is the better time, because doing it 2 months before elections may not cut it. As an alternative revenue source, the committee recommends an increase in the number of toll gates and the revision of the toll gate fees. In order to correct the country's structural foreign exchange balance, the committee recommends that the government decisively implement a long-term export diversification and industrialization strategy. There is a need to improve regulatory governance in key productive sectors, particularly mining, by enforcing transparency in concession agreements, tightening oversight of investor compliance, and ensuring meaningful domestic value retention. And the Honorable Minister is commended for banning export of raw materials, because we cannot industrialize if all our raw materials go out of our permeable borders to benefit industries in the surrounding. And I have in mind, Right Honorable Speaker, of the scrap metal that really treks down to our neighbors, whereas we have companies here that want to establish value addition and they are having no raw materials because everything has been mobbed out to our neighboring countries, supporting our neighboring companies. And I applaud the Minister for banning the export of such raw materials. As a short-term solution to forex shortage, the committee urges the government to fast-track ongoing negotiations with the IMF and the international development partners to stabilize the forex position and restore stability in the foreign exchange market. The committee recommends that the government strengthens fiscal consolidation efforts to support the anchoring of inflation expectations. There is need for the fiscal policy to align with monetary tightening by the MPC in order to help contribute to a more sustainable disinflation path. The committee also recommends that government should make a deliberate policy choice between expanding the welfare spending or enforcing austerity. Given the tight fiscal environment, there is need to tighten expenditure further and shift resources towards productive investment that can stimulate growth, create jobs, and strengthen long-term fiscal sustainability. There is always the political persuasion, Right Honorable Speaker, to go populism, but the budget has been, both the SONA and the budget has projected an austerity approach to resolving and stabilizing our economic malaise. And we would want to recommend as a committee to the minister to not be persuaded to go on the welfare state policies, because the House is meant to believe, and the committee supports that approach, that we need to take the austerity way forward if we have to stabilize our macro. So in order to manage the wage bill, government should ensure that all essential recruitments are planned and costed during budget formulation to avoid mid-year overruns. And the committee recommends the government's plan to conduct payroll audit and will be closely following this initiative. On the growing domestic debt challenge, the committee recommends that the government should explore targeted taxation and related fiscal instruments on financial institutions to recoup the resources in a manner that promotes fiscal sustainability and avoids undue disruption to the financial market. On development expenditure, the committee calls upon the government to outline measures to address the challenges facing foreign financed projects, including forex shortages, procurement delays, weak PIUs, and safeguard requirements. In conclusion, Right Honorable Speaker, the committee sympathizes deeply with the Honorable Minister of Finance and the Executive for having to steer the ship of state in such constrained fiscal and macroeconomic environment. The Minister is in a situation of great dilemma to cut expenditure whilst at the same time fund government in the second half of the year. So statutory expenditures alone are already absorbing almost all projected domestic revenues, leaving very limited room for policy maneuver and making every quarter of additional spending or borrowing a painful choice. Your committee, therefore, does not underestimate the weight of these decisions, nor the political and social implications that come with governing in a time of high inflation, time of forex shortages, and a time of slow growth and rising debt. Therefore, Right Honorable Speaker, precisely because the situation is so grave, the committee believes that this is not the time to drift towards a welfare state that promises more than the economic and sustainable finance. Social protection for the most vulnerable must be preserved, but broad and funded welfare-type programs and consumption-driven expenditures that undermine fiscal consolidation should be avoided. The committee therefore calls upon government to be courageous and to uphold in both letter and spirit the austerity measures it has announced. From curbing non-essential spending, enforcing strict adherence to budget ceilings, avoiding unbudgeted commitments, and environments which often only reorient resources to lesser priorities. Mr. Speaker, sir, the committee stands ready to work with the Honorable Minister of Finance, development partners, the private sector, and all stakeholders in crafting and overseeing tough but necessary reforms that restore confidence and place our country on a credible path to sustainability, to stability and prosperity. And our appeal to the House and to all Malawians is that we face these realities honestly, resist short-term populism, and choose discipline over convenience. If we make the hard decisions today, we will give ourselves a fighting chance to rebuild an economy that can sustainably finance the aspirations of all Malawians. Mr. Speaker, sir, I now beg to move that this report be agreed to by the whole House. Right Honorable Speaker, I beg to move.
Please switch off the mic, Honorable. Thank you. Order. Thank you very much. Spokesperson from the Malawi Congress, the chair for the Budget and Finance Committee. The spokesperson really confused me. Chair, thanks so much for that wonderful report. May I now call upon a member of the committee to second the report. Thereafter, we'll have a health break. Chair, do you? Oh, yes. I see Honorable, which constituency is that?
Ncheubanje.
Ncheubanje, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, for granting me the floor to second the report of the Budget and Finance Committee following its analysis on 2025-2026 mid-year budget review presented by the Honorable Minister of Finance on Friday, 21st November 2025. Mr. Speaker, sir, the chairperson has rightly highlighted that our macroeconomic environment is largely fragile. Growth has been revised down. Money supply is expanding far faster than the real output, and inflation continues to erode the buying power of ordinary households. At the same time, our total public debt has reached alarming levels, with interest payments alone now consuming a very large share of the budget. Statutory expenditures and personal emoluments are now absorbing virtually all domestic revenues, leaving almost nothing for discretionary policy choices. This is the clearest indication that Malawi's physical space has effectively closed, and that without firm consolidation and better coordination between fiscal and monetary policy, we will struggle to restore stability. Mr. Speaker, sir, beyond the immediate budget arithmetic, the committee has pointed out the deeper structural issues that must be addressed. The need for credible export diversification and industrialization strategy, improved governance and transparency in key sectors such as mining, and accelerated engagement with the IMF and other development partners to stabilize the foreign exchange position. It has also emphasized the importance of managing the wage bill within realistic limits, planning recruitment properly during budget formulation, and tackling implementation bottlenecks of foreign financed projects so that existing resources are effectively absorbed and translated into tangible development outcomes. Mr. Speaker, sir, in seconding this report, I wish to echo the observations and recommendations of the committee as presented by the Honorable Chairperson. This report offers the House a sober, constructive, and non-partisan roadmap, one that acknowledges the hardships facing Malawians, recognizes the difficult position of the Minister of Finance, but insists that we cannot tax our way to prosperity nor spend our way out of the debt crisis. Instead, we must choose discipline over convenience, long-term sustainability over short-term populism, and productive investment. If, as a House and as a nation, we rally behind these principles and support the implementation of the committee's recommendations, we will give ourselves a real chance to stabilize the economy and rebuild the foundations for inclusive growth. Mr. Speaker, sir, with these few remarks, I wholeheartedly second the motion that the report of the Budget and Finance Committee on the 2025-2026 mid-year budget review be adopted by this Honorable House. I beg to second. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Thank you very much, honourable members. After health break, we will debate on the Budget Committee report. But for now, let me suspend the House for health break. We will be back at 4:20, 16:20. House suspended.